when I woke up, very confused. She said, "You almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you were alive."
I went into the games not knowing what was coming.
As humans, we just hate uncertainty.
You just sensed that it was out there.
You have to start somewhere.
We're all programmed to push ourselves even farther.
This is On the X, an IRONCLAD original. Welcome to On the X. I'm Chris Irwin, and today my guest is Jon Arend. Jon is sort of part fitness trainer, part health guru, and part biohacker who's worked with A-list celebrities, professional athletes, and executives of Fortune 500 companies. He's the co-founder of Combat Science, an online platform offering integrated self-defense and fitness training, and the founder of the Arend Method, a holistic online wellness company based in Park City, Utah. There are 9 components to his method: light, water, magnetism, brain, sleep, nutrition, stress, structure, and movement. And I had fun going down the rabbit hole with him on a bunch of these. He's extremely well-read and knowledgeable when it comes to holistic health, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. So here we go with Jon Arend on the X. You obviously have gone really deep into the fitness arena, which is something I'm very interested in as well, and have not as extensive as a background, but certainly have dove into various aspects of that. So what got you? Did you grow up playing sports specifically that kind of got you into that, or kind of what was the draw for you originally?
Yeah, I would say original entry into like athletics was both my parents were kind of naturally athletic, which is funny when you see my dad now. He would be like, "Oh yeah, I got this extra here," but he's 81 and he's cruising around like he's, people think he's like late 60s, early 70s. Yeah. And my mom's also athletic too. And they never really pursued sports like in college or anything like that. But I've always done all these sports. I was always fascinated. Like I played tennis and soccer, and I was like, oh, I want to learn golf. And I was trying to learn golf, and it's like, I've always been interested in how it all works and the biomechanics of it. And I just didn't really know that at the time. So when school came around, I played football in high school and had a bunch of, scholarship offers for like D2 schools. Looking back, sometimes you wish you'd maybe thought clearly through things a little bit more instead of just like, no, I wouldn't do that. That's stupid. And, so I didn't want to do the Division II schools because I was like, I want to play. If I'm going to do something, I want to play Division I. Mm-hmm. And I had played 4 sports in high school, so I was like, and I was in basketball, tennis, track, and football. Right? Did I say that? Yeah. Well, those 4, right? Basketball, tennis, track, and football. Yep. Got to get it right there. And so it was like, it was crazy. It was just like constantly driving from one event to the next, playing a different sport, and that I didn't realize at the time planted the seed on how I look at athletics now and how I look at athletic development now, because I didn't play one sport. I didn't isolate myself into that one, motor pattern or habituated pattern. I think that makes a huge difference in athletic development, especially in young kids. So after that, I went down to University of Texas in Austin, and I was like, well, I'm going to go walk on. And there was a guy at the time who was 6'5" and ran a 4.4 40. And they looked at me, I'm like 6'1", and I ran a 4.5 40, but they looked at me and they're like, him or you? And I was like, okay, I understand. I get it. You're going to pick him. And they're like, yeah, we're going to pick him. And I was like, okay, great. I get it. So I was like, well, I'm going to do pre-med, because I thought, okay, I'll stay in sciences. I'll stay in the health. I'll stay in that. And I worked in an emergency room. And, it was I have to say it was a disappointment working in the emergency room. I mean, there was things you learned. Huh?
In what way? What do you mean by that?
Well, because it is just like it's like symptom care, right? So like in this emergency room, people were coming in, like, and I can tell a story about one of the nights. I was a volunteer as part of the program, right? So you're not like involved deeply. They're like, hey, do this, do that. And they give you directions and they kind of keep you out of the mix a little bit, but you get to see it. And so I was there, and I knew all the doctors and all the nurses by then, and was kind of connected. And so they said, go work the front. And I was like, okay, cool. So I'm in admin, I'm working.
Doesn't
They get a call.
Just sorry, just on that point though. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I'm big on personally looking at, in terms of medicine, looking at cause versus symptoms and getting to the root issue. However, isn't emergency room care, doesn't it kind of have to be symptomatically oriented?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. And I wasn't, and I should clarify, like I wasn't doing the emergency room. That wasn't what I want to do as a specialty. Like,
Okay.
I was looking at like orthopedic surgery,
Okay.
you know, some along the lines of like a sports type orthopedic surgery. And, but they put you automatically in this place and you have to go through this program. So as I'm sitting there, we get a call that there's a guy coming in, he's had a heart attack. He had passed away, but you know, they're obviously going to do all the stuff they can as they admit him. And so it's chaos, and you've gone from nothing to chaos. And so I'm sitting there and I'm just like, well, okay, wow. And sure enough, I've already heard, here comes the family coming in. And I'm like, oh no, like I'm sitting there like already backing up, pedaling back. Cause I'm like, what am I going to say?
Mm-hmm.
You could see just this fear and this shock that was occurring in this family, and it's a wife and her 2 kids. And I'm just like, I don't have an answer. She's like, did my husband pass away? And I was like, yes. And she starts bawling. I start bawling. I'm like hugging her. The doctors come out and they're like, what the hell is going on out here? Like, what is happening? And I was like, it just, you know, this is how I don't know what to say. Like, and he's like, they're like, the nurse is like, oh my God, okay, like, hold on, we got it. And I walked away from it. I was like, wow, I really screwed up. And, you know, I'm sitting there and talking with this doctor later that night, and he's like, you know, you have to be professional. You got to keep boundaries. You got to like, and I'm like, I couldn't. It was just an emotional moment that I had with this family coming in. And, you know, it just had me thinking, I was like, why? It's crazy. This guy was like 43 years old. And I was like, why has this guy had a heart attack and died?
Was he, so a couple questions on that. And actually there's a point you made earlier that I want to go back into as well about kids sports and specialization. Cause I think it's really like, I think about this a lot too, but just on that point, was the issue your personal emotional reaction to it? Was it the interaction with the people, with the family, both of those things? And then what was the deal with this guy? Was he really overweight? I mean, a 43-year-old have a heart attack is.
Yes, young. I mean, I didn't look, you know, I didn't get to see a file or anything like that or know the name or anything, but he didn't, from what I understand, he didn't look like he was out of shape or, you know, what you would typically think of somebody who has, you know, those kind of symptoms. And to answer your question too, I think both issues were there for me. It was an emotional thing that I got too emotional, you know, cause it's just, you're connected to humans and people.
Yeah.
And then also they were like, that's not the protocols for what we do and how we set up this stuff. You know, it was like,
yeah, I get that.
And I get it. I understand. I totally understand. I would never, you know, it's what you have to do, right? It's like you have to step back and detach from that environment so that you sometimes make decisions and do things you need to do. But in that moment, it felt like the right thing for me to do.
Yeah, I mean, I find that interesting because, of course, like whatever the job may be, I think you have to be able to maintain composure to do the job correctly. But the scenario you're describing to me doesn't sound like you weren't able to do your job. And it sounds to me, I don't come from this world at all, but it sounds to me like that's what those people needed. It doesn't sound like
that was a problem. It's what it felt. It's what it felt like they needed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it felt like that, and I think to deny that emotional connection with another human like that it's kind of weird, right? It's just not. It's not what we do. So yeah, that really derailed me. And there's a precursor to this too. My mom had an aneurysm when I was a senior in high school, and it was one of those things like I sat up in bed in the middle of the night in high school and I just went, something's wrong. And my dad came in the room and he goes, your mom. And I go, I know. And that was it. That's all we said. We never said another word. I scooped her up, picked her, put her in the car. My dad's an aeronautical engineer, like NASA, like, you know, I call him nerdy, you know, I love him to death. And he's like driving. He would never drive fast. He drove fast. We both knew it was like, life and death
Wait,
situation.
he's
We
an
got him to the
actual
hospital.
NASA engineer?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
cool. Nice.
So we rode there. We got there and got my mom in the hospital, and luckily they life flighted her down into Dallas, and the guy happened to be working there, like Dr. Khalid, and he saved her life. He's like one of the top specialists in aneurysm surgery and stuff like that. So she had no, we joke about it, but she had no symptoms from it and is still, moving and awesome today.
Wow.
But that, those two things, when I saw that person, the family, and then I saw my mom, almost, I was like, wait, it's that moment where you kind of hit the fork in the road or the tipping point where you're kind of like, what am I doing? Like, is this what I want to do?
Well, okay, but to that point, it sounds to me like the first instance was one where that may have turned you off from medicine. It sounds like where you just feel like, oh, I didn't respond correctly here according to protocols. However, it felt like the right thing to do. The other circumstance, though, it seems like the medicine doctors saved your mom's life.
Saved my mom.
Right?
I know. It's a really interesting, like, I mean, that's what I was saying. I'm super confused. I was like, oh my God, like my mom got saved in an emergency room setting by the tools and techniques that they had there.
Yep.
But then I see other people. And so it just made me stop and think. And, I literally, I went from University of Texas. I'd never made a B in my entire life all the way through high school. Like I was super oriented towards achievement and all the different stuff and all the sports. And I think I made a 1.8 the next semester GPA. So I did my best to like see how many hot tub parties I could go to and this and that. Speaking of, imagine University of Texas. I mean, it's
not alone.
Little easy to get caught in that. And I was like, I was mountain biking, climbing and hiking and doing all this stuff. And I was like, this is like life could be done tomorrow. Like, why wouldn't I just go enjoy all this stuff? And then, then the realization kicks in and you start to grow up a little bit and you go, okay, wait, hold on. Like I want to finish school. I want to get through this. I want to figure out something else. But it gnawed at me that, and I had kept in touch with these doctors and I was like, why don't we look at this preventative care? And they're like, you're in the wrong field. Like, this is, we fix knees, we fix things that are already broken. We have emergency rooms. We, help people with heart attacks. And said, go do something else. And I was like, what does that look like? So that led me on this weird circuitous route to find like, what is it? And, the easiest one that I saw was fitness, because that's, you see fitness and you see health and muscles and people. And you're like, oh yeah, that's gotta be it. That's the solution to being healthy and living longer. And I was like, oh, that's a component of it. And so then that led into, well, it's your nutrition too. Like, what are you eating? What are you putting in your body? Okay. That's another component. And then it led to, well, if you're not structurally aligned, right, and your body's not moving right, it's really hard to work out and hard to do stuff. And so then that got thrown in the mix. And then it was like, well, there's sleep, then there's stress, right? Then there's, how are you breathing? What's going on with that? And then it became, it's about functional neurology, which is kind of some of the stuff I'm working on the most, I'd say now. But then it got into really interesting stuff with like light, water, and magnetism. Yeah. Because those three components are driving everything in life and all the inputs into the brain, right? So like they're the bigger ones. And then when you start to go down those rabbit holes, you're just like, wow, okay, this is a challenge to figure out some of this stuff, because it starts getting into, pretty deep into quantum physics and biophotonic physics and things like that, which I love learning about. But sometimes I'm like, what did I just read? I don't even know. I have no idea. Like I've gone to a conference with one of my friends who's a writer, and he this guy James Nestor wrote the book Breath. And so I was like, we went to this conference together. Yeah, it's awesome. We went to this conference together and we're sitting in there, and I'll never forget, because he's next to me and we sat down. It's this energy conference. And this guy starts talking and I'm like, you have a double take. You're like, I'm not even gonna make it through this first 5 minutes of this lecture. And I look over at him and he's like, I don't know what he's saying. And it's so true, because these guys they're at this level of their understanding and how they communicate and stuff. So But you try to grab onto that for health and wellness, a little bit of it.
So before we get into, 'cause, man, there's so much there. And I kind of want to, but I want to spend time on, I think the things that people, to your point, are probably more confused about. I think things like exercise, pretty much everyone's bought off on exercise. Good idea, right? We kind of get that. And we can argue about how to exercise, certainly.
Sure.
And even what to eat. But I think everyone agrees, like, healthy food, however you define that, good idea. But I do want to dive into some of these other things and what you've done to sort of bring that together into kind of what I would call like a holistic framework. But there's two things I want to ask, just going back to some points you made. The first was you talked about specialization versus sort of broad athletics growing up. Can you just talk about that in terms of your feelings on that? Because this is something I think about even with my own kids, where I think when they were younger, I liked the fact that they bounced around to different sports and tried different things. But I have two kids. I've probably talked about this too much. Anybody who's listens to this podcast, but I have two kids that are very serious figure skaters now. And have really specialized into that because they kind of have to. And then I have another son who plays basketball and soccer and is sort of more of a generalist, but has kind of gotten into those sports. And there is certainly, I can see the point of, in terms of, let's call it overall health and longevity, a broad spectrum of these skills and athletic disciplines is probably better. However, if you really want to excel at something or go play it in college or even do it professionally, you have to specialize. So what's your cut on that in terms of, I guess, when to go, which direction?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough to answer the question because it's all such an individual based. Like if I said I'm a family or someone, I would really want to take a bunch of assessments of what's going on.
Yeah.
I think overall, all young kids, like I always say to my kids and family, friends and kids, I mean, I train kids here in Park City just on sprinting technique. And because I watch them run in soccer, I'm like, oh my God, okay, come on, we gotta let's get some kind of formalized training into that, because that can help you guys, be faster. The coaches will love you for it. You're also going to reduce injuries and you're educating yourself on how to move better. Right. And I think being a generalist early is important because it's more about the brain. I look at a lot of this stuff through the brain inputs and how the brain responds, because everything goes through it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
If you're not thinking about that and you're thinking, I have a ton of people I've worked with that are extremely high level physiotherapists and exercise physiologists, and they're in this classification of where it's like, well, we want to look at how the subtalar joint hits on the ground and how that, puts and generates load and force. And I'm like, that's awesome. We should assess that. But let's think about how can we do that in a natural environment, maybe doing multiplanar movement and different stuff.
So when you talk about the impact on the brain, is that just a better kinesthetic awareness, like a better ability for you to control your body in three-dimensional space? Or when you say, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like, exactly?
Yeah, that's a component of it. I think the brain is really interesting to me because it's not only just about like your proprioception, right? What you're feeling with the ground, but it's like your interoreception, which is like internal. Mm-hmm. How do you sense somebody next to you, right? It's how your vision, your vestibular system, your cerebellum, all of those are communicating with each other. And if we, for lack of, and I'm not a big fan of these terms, but like we have a motor pattern that we kind of burn in, or we myelinate, right? The nerve pattern. You get better at it, right? And the signaling gets better. And the cerebellum gets like, okay, I understand this. I'm reaching for this cup, or I'm throwing this ball, or I'm swinging this club, right? So you'll see like smooth movement as I'm reaching and doing stuff. You'll see really smooth movement. When you're new, it's jerky and you're trying to figure it out and you're very conscious of it. But the way I look at it is if you take all of that when you're younger and you put yourself in all these different situations where you might not be great in, your brain gets more of what I would say a better foundation, a bigger base to the pyramid that you can build on by doing all these different things. I mean, an instance, like I worked with a bunch of tennis players on a tennis facility, and we would take tennis players and they'd come in and they'd have a perception of how they want to train. I'll say, no, okay, put the racket in your left hand. And they're like, well, I'm not left-handed. I'm like, yeah, it's okay. You're going to play left and right. You're going to hit right-handed backhands, left-handed backhands. You're going to play with an eye patch on your non-dominant, your dominant eye, your non-dominant eye. We're going to do all these drills because all of that's building your perception, your awareness, the senses, the inputs into the brain. So that it makes you, that could be something that you end up having faster reaction time to see a ball coming. Maybe you're more anticipatory. Maybe you avoid an injury because now your brain is understanding more where your foot is because you've played in these 3 dimensions with different stimulus.
Yeah. So it's almost like building I don't know how to describe this exactly, but you basically what you're saying is like you're creating a bigger brain foundation of neurons and synapses to work with, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're expanding all of it, right? So the brain, like, and it's really fascinating. There's some really interesting stuff that's being done now with like, I could take someone who's in pain and we can close their eyes and do a sound test where they're trying to figure out the sound, and then they come back and move their joint and there's no pain.
Yeah.
There's, it's really fascinating to me how all that works, right? Like, so I have one I always do with people. It's like, I do these swipes on the bottom of their ankle, right? So I just like rub, I'm like, show me your hamstring stretch. And they reach down. And I'm like, well, let's see if it's a brain break. So the brain's putting the brake on the movement, or if it's actually your hamstring's a problem. And they'll be like, okay, cool. And I'll swipe underneath their, the bone on their outside of their ankle. And I'll say, okay, go ahead and go down. And they'll go down like 4 or 5 more inches.
Wait a minute. So what's going on there?
Yeah. So that's stimulating an area of the brain that's highly represented, right, by a bunch of nerves in the brain and patterns in the brain, right? So your feet, your hands, there's this thing called the homunculus.
Yep.
Like if it,
well, I know what theoretic. I mean, homunculus is like a little person, a little representation of somebody inside of somebody. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have this homunculus of nerve, like what the brain, how much energy or nerve patterns are in the brain, right? So lips, nose, tongue, fingers, right? Hands are huge, would be huge in the representation because you have tons of connections to your hands, right? We couldn't do the things we do. Same thing with the feet. So by stimulating down the feet in this area where your brain wants to understand where it is, because if you're stepping on the ground, it wants to say, well, where is this joint in space? What's it doing? So I can stimulate that. And something where the body might have put brakes on the hamstrings and said, hey, I'm not sure because I don't know what's going down on these feet. All of a sudden now you rub that and stimulate, the brain goes, oh, I know exactly where that joint is. Oh, I can relax. And it's like, whoop, down.
Interesting. So it's basically a disconnect. There's some kind of disconnect, almost like a mind and body disconnect there that
there's a lot.
Reconnecting.
I would say a lot of like functional movement or stuff is a disconnection in the brain, or a lack of, like, if you have an input in, it's not being perceived right or properly or quickly. And then the output is off a little bit. So, and over time, the brain goes, oh, well, that's what you want me to do. Okay, I'll do that. So that's one of the reasons why I like stimulating the brain in all these different planes of motion, doing these different sports, not only thinking about that your foot's on the ground, but what happens when your body's on the ground? What happens when you're crawling and rolling? And, kids laugh. They love it because we go out and do combat rolls in the grass and crawl and do, vestibular rolls. And then they're jumping up and down and running and they're catching balls with letters on it. And we're doing all of these things because to me, that's how I'd want to build like that. If I could go back, that's how I would build myself too. Because then when you get into other things, you can just, it's like it's the system's primed for like quickly gaining an understanding of what new movement you're trying to do.
Yeah. So, the flip side to that though is specialization, which is if you want to be the best in something, you have to specialize.
Yeah. There's a point, I think. There's a point. Yeah. You have to, at some point in time, you have to determine your level, what's going on with your brain, your commitment, your motivation, all these types of things, like put those down and be like, yeah, this is what I love to do this. And I think like, if it's things you love to do, you naturally start to like to funnel that anyway. It's like you enjoy doing that more than any other thing. So you start to become really good at it because you enjoy doing it. Some people are just good at things. They don't even really enjoy it, but they're just good at it. So then that funnels them into the specialization. I do think like there's a point of specialization, but like I was working with a wide receiver in the NFL, and I was like, well, this pass coming over the top, he was dropping the ball. And I was like, okay, well, let's go work on a bunch of stuff that's not connected to football, right? Catching tennis balls over with like one eye, trying to catch it with two fingers, all these other things to get him away kind of from almost what the brain was perceiving he needed to do. So we're just like reset. It's almost like a reset for him. And then he was out in Montana when we were living there. It's pretty funny to like have him come out and be in snow and move there, right? And it's like a total change of your environment and what's happening on the ground and the ground reaction. And then you go back and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, it's a lot easier, right? I can see this thing. I can perceive it. My brain understands, oh yeah, I've been looking at a little ball with a letter on it coming over.
Yeah. So there's an argument there basically of saying, even when you're specialized, there's certainly some degree of doing tangential or whatever you want to call it types of things that they're sort of related, but they're kind of different too, that can help you actually get better in that discipline.
Yeah. So one of the things that when you said ice skating right away, I would grab your kid and say, okay, finish the program, finish your day, trying, if you're spinning this way on tricks, spin the other way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Or if your program led to skating in this way and then there's a turn and a trick, try to figure out how could you do it the opposite way.
Yep.
Because that's called I forget who coined it. There's someone who coined it, but it's like rewinding the motor patterns. And they found like you repair faster, all kinds of things like that. If I'm a pitcher and I throw tons of balls with my right arm, is to actually finish the practice throwing balls with your left arm.
Yeah. 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 And I can speak to that for sure with my kids, is they already experience some imbalances, but they have to try to get worked out with various physical therapists and things like that, because they're always the spinning, not so much, but the jumping, because you're always jumping off the same foot, you know?
Yeah. Yep. So like jumping. Yeah. And I don't do a lot. I don't work with anybody in that field, but like, that's what I would say, is jump on that other foot.
Yeah. That'd be tough.
Which would be crazy. Hard. Right. Cause it's like I was learning surfing and I was like, I go out and surf and I get crushed. I call it falling and getting crushed. And
that's what I call it when I do it too.
Waves and, I'm never one of these people that's like, oh, I'm going to go out. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a 7-foot wave. What the hell? Let's go. And but I started riding opposite. So I ride goofy with my left foot back. So I started switching into a normal stance and trying that. And it's like, then when I went back to goofy, I was like, oh yeah, I feel my foot much more. I could tell where my foot was on the board for the placement of it.
Yeah.
It was just like, it just opened it up for me to improve, because, I'm looking for any way to do it quicker than the time it takes a lot of times to do it. So
let's kind of, I'm going to skip over something here, but let's kind of go back to, all right. So you're sort of coming out of this potentially medicine doctor career and sort of finding your own way. Did you start off as a trainer? And actually, how do you refer to yourself? Are you a fitness trainer? Are you a sports scientist? Do you have a title?
That's been the question. It drives my wife nuts, because she's very good about, putting all this stuff in business, and people are like, what do you do? And I'm like, I integrate all these different components together to create a health program. And they're like, oh, you're a doctor? No. Are you a physical therapist? No. Are you a trainer? No. It's like, I'm all of it. Like an expert generalist is almost more what I've become. It's just like, I just take whatever component of that person I'm looking at and say, oh, this is where we could start here. And and that's how I've always looked at, it's like, I thought about going back and, which is crazy to go back and try to get my MD. And I was like, that's something, it's like so far off of what I wanted to do, but gives you the credentials to.
It's one of those tough things, right? Because to your point, sometimes it can give you some credentials that establish credibility or just kind of can get your foot in the door. However, it's just here's my personal opinion on that. It's somebody else's system. And if you're trying to bring something that is new, that's sort of integrative or holistic, or just a different way of looking at things, well, kind of by definition, it's not a certification that somebody else gives.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And and also if you're in a formula, you can't quickly change that formula. Like I am always looking for better stuff. Right. And I'll tell every single one of my clients, like, this is what I know now. This is what I'm studying. Mm-hmm. Honestly, when I look at all the stuff out there, I'm like, barely know anything. Yeah. I mean, I barely know anything. It's like, and so I'm just like, I want to learn. I want to do more. I'll make it better each time, because that's a passion for me, is like, I want to try to get someone the best stuff I know out there. And so that requires a lot of shifting and grabbing onto tangents and things that you're like, oh, that could apply to here. And, I mean, it looks weird. Like, I have mad scientists up in my office upstairs, because it's like notes are everywhere, notebooks, and things are open, and 17 books. And people are like, this guy's off a little bit. But I'm like, yeah, I am. It's okay. But I'm always taking those things to try to create a better system. Yeah. And that's what I'm excited about.
So again, did you like start off in a discipline though? Because you do have credentials, you do have things obviously that you've studied and things like that. Yeah. Did you yes. Okay, I started off as a yoga instructor, and then I veered off or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So I worked at a funny club in LA. It used to be called the Sports Club LA. And it was this pretty famous club, and I went through their trainer certification, right? So it was in National Academy of Sports Medicine stuff. And it's like one of those things where on a Sunday night you would be playing basketball, because they would have me play basketball in there. And it would be Shaquille playing with Leonardo DiCaprio with Adam Sandler.
Shit, seriously?
And you're just looking around like, how's this happen? And
I want to see that game, by the way. I want to see Shaquille O'Neal playing Leonardo DiCaprio and pick up basketball.
That'd and you had to have Mark Cuban in there, and all these people from LA would congregate in there, and they'd play basketball in these places. And it was pretty funny, because you're like, Shaq can't shoot inside the paint; he has to shoot outside. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those places where at that moment it was like the place to train, the place to be. I worked there for about a year doing just literally training, and was kind of like, I want to get out. It's not what I didn't want to work for somebody, because once again, you're funneled down into a system where you can't do things. And so I left there, and then took my training on the road and started taking people all over the place. And, I was like, well, this client wants to go learn to surf. I was like, well, I can't do that in the gym. Let's go out to, let's go surf. And so it was like, well, let's get out in the water. Okay, well, we can do all this stuff on the beach. We can mobilize. We can do all this tissue work there. We can do all this prep work. We can then go out and surf. And then we come back and we can stretch and do these things. And, I was like, this is awesome. Like, this is a cool job. Like, I get to go surf with people and snow ski. And so I started learning all these different things to almost like be able to do them with clients too.
And were you working primarily with people that are healthy to begin with, or what we would consider generally healthy, and wanted to get better in a discipline? Or was it people that were also severely unhealthy or out of shape that wanted to go through some kind of metamorphosis?
It was all kinds. Yeah. I mean, you're getting everybody from someone who might be in some movie that's, has to do surfing, right, in the movie, to somebody that's, has cancer, maybe in the last couple of years of life, and, I'd have clients like that where I'd go to their house, and it was just like, hey, let's do some movement. Let's go get out in the sun. Let's take a walk on the beach. I mean, it literally to that point, because there's nothing, you couldn't do a lot of stuff right there. They just need to move and feel like there was hope almost. And so it bridged that. That was how wide of a swath of people that I was working with.
Do you have any like huge, big success stories that either with someone that's famous or someone that's not famous, where it was like a complete transformation for somebody?
Yeah, I do. I hope I can. I don't want to get in trouble talking.
Well, I'm not asking you to divulge any proprietary information here or anything, but
well, I can talk around it a little bit.
Okay.
There was a person of an extremely wealthy family, and I'll give you the family names, Getty. And I got a call about one of their kids and said, hey, you know, this guy's in trouble and has been through addiction stuff, has been through all these things. And I said, okay, you know, I'll show up. Let's see what happens. And everybody loves this story because it cracks everybody up. But so I show up and this guy's standing outside and he's got his cut off sweatpants on and his purple glasses. And I'm like, this will be interesting. Okay. I'm not going to make any judgments. Let's see what happens here. And I pull in and he's like, hey, are you John? You John? And I was like, yeah, I'm John. And he's like, come on in. And we sit in this, you know, it's like a castle basically. And I'm walking in, I'm like, oh my God, like there's knight armor and art everywhere around this place.
Yeah, a lot like my house.
Yeah, me too. Right. And there's like these rugs that are there. And, and then I walk in this room. It's like kind of like a dark, almost like smoking room. And the guitars are lined up on the back wall. And I'm like, wow, okay, this is pretty cool. This is awesome. And he goes, oh, I got to sit down. I have to, and I probably shouldn't hopefully not get in trouble, but he said, I have to smoke first. And I was like, smoke? What do you mean smoke? And he's like, well, I have to smoke some pot because I have to like calm down and get ready. And I was like, okay, this is LA. I'm like, okay, let's see where this goes. And he starts and I'm like, okay, I have clients after this. So I don't, you know, I was like, I don't smoke. Like, can I walk in the other room while you do this? And he's like, no, I got even something better. And I was like, all right, cool. What is it? Hands me a gas mask. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go with this. I'm going to stay with, let's see what happens here. I put this thing on. He's there. He's doing his thing. I'm walking around. I'm like, when is this session going to start? And go over and I pick up one of the guitars and I start playing it, right? And he goes, oh, you play guitar? And I was like, yeah, I know like basic country music. And he's like, well, play G, follow into the D and then F. And I was like, all right, cool. We start playing and I'm looking up. I'm just like, what the hell's going on? I'm like, all right, awesome. And I'm playing. Next thing I know, we're jamming. He's singing. I got a gas mask on. Room's full of pot smoke. And I was like, okay, time's up, my friend. And he's like, that was the best session I've ever had in my entire life. And I was like, okay, that's great. I love it too. And I'm thinking like, okay, that was done. I'm never going to see this guy again. Get a call. They're like, can you come back up? So cut to the point of why I'm saying this is like about 8 weeks later, this guy is in the sun off of most of his medications, tan, lean, exercising. Like he couldn't even do a squat or a push up. He's doing tons of them. He's running the stairs. We got music going in this place. I mean, total change. In so much that and I can't get into the next part, but like some things happened inside the family because of that. And I was pulled away from that. It was very strange. You're working with people that have more money than know what to do with, but
okay, but clearly you did more with this guy than just sit in a room with a gas mask on and play guitar. So
yeah, that's the weird stuff of how I say, like, I think of like this client, like you can't like draw a system out necessarily for somebody like that. You have to just sit and go, okay, let's try this path and see what happens. And then I'm going to say, you know, I'm not going to say 2 + 2 = what? I'm going to say 2 + X = 4 and let him go, oh, it's 2. And so he chooses and I'm like, okay, cool, let's do that.
Okay.
And then you see, as I always know, like as you start getting people moving and eating healthier and in the sunlight, you start to see the dopamine levels and serotonin levels come up and, you know, it changes them. And so then it starts to create this synergy between all that and they start getting motivated. They're excited. And so it's, that was a pretty funny one where, yeah, you're just like, I had no idea where that was going to go. And there's way more stories to it, but I would definitely get in trouble if I told the other parts of the story. So
On the X is proudly presented by Mechanics Wear, the gloves trusted by pros. Originally designed by a legendary race mechanic, Mechanics Wear has become the top choice for anyone who needs tough, reliable protection. From construction sites to the front lines, these gloves offer unbeatable comfort, durability, and grip. Stay cool, dry, and in control with Mechanics wear. Gear up for whatever comes your way. And just speaking personally, Mechanics gloves were the go-to glove for us in the military, certainly. And they're still my go-to glove when it comes to just working around the house. Glove that I've worn for decades at this point, and is still kind of my go-to glove. Mechanics wear gloves are available at most retailers, as well as on mechanics.com and on GSA Advantage. Mechanics Wear is also proud to offer an exclusive 15% off discount through the ID.me program to military, veterans, and first responders. Click on the ID.me button in your shopping cart and follow the steps to verify your eligibility. All right, so let's kind of talk about your system here that you've amassed over. I don't know, how long has this taken you to kind of put together? And obviously you're still adding to it.
I mean, it's been, the system's been started since I was probably, I mean, I hate to say it, probably when I was like in college. So 30 years or more. Okay. You know?
Yeah.
So
how old are you?
I'm 52.
Oh, wow.
Today, I'm actually 52 today. Yeah.
I would not guess that.
Yeah.
You look great, man. Wow.
Thanks.
Yeah. And by the way, is it Arend? How do you pronounce your last name?
Arend. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was
Arend.
joking with the guys ahead of before this that John, it's spelled differently. Jon Arend I was like, that's the dude that dies at the beginning of Game of Thrones, right? That sets the whole thing off in motion, right? It's spelled differently.
People all the time were like, you have the same name as the guy from Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
it's
Hand
like,
of the King that you never meet.
Yeah.
So 9 components to this. I'm going to read them off just because I did not commit these to memory, but light,
me either.
Light, water, magnetism, brain, sleep, nutrition, stress, structure, and movement. So obviously we could go down, I'm sure, a deep rabbit hole with each one of these, but maybe let's talk about some of the ones that people aren't probably tracking on as much. When I look at that list, something like magnetism really jumps out to me. Yeah. So maybe we start there, but then I'd also want to know, of these things, like, is it an even balance? Is there one where you tend to come across people where it's like that is a big hole in their game, so to speak, across people, or is it completely different? But so take that any direction you want. But I am very curious about the magnetism thing. Yeah.
So as I kind of did what everybody does, right? I always start off with like fitness, and I was like we were talking about earlier, saying that's got to be the solution, right? We see all these studies come out and say exercise, increases longevity, does all this stuff. And I was like, okay, what causes, why is exercising causing that? And it's like, you start to get into like autophagy and all these other things with like the mitochondrial health. And I'm like, well, what drives mitochondria? And so I start just researching and trying to dig into this as much as possible. And it led me to some, what people say are controversial people. And I kind of step back and I'm like, sometimes it's just the way they deliver their message. But like, there's a guy, Dr. Jack Kruse, that people get flustered with, like in the paleo community and stuff like that, because he said some stuff. But when you dig into the science that he's pulling out, or the people at least he's researching, you start to get into some pretty heavy quantum physics and biophysics and things like that. And it made me go, wow, okay, I didn't know anything about magnetism necessarily, or, I knew about light a bit, how that affects you. Water, obviously, how that affects you. But there's even deeper components of water that people don't think about. And, magnetism as one, they all work together. So that's the hard part, is like, you could get your light right. That means like your circadian biology, your circadian lighting, your timing is right, but it might not work, right? So one of the big ones to kind of bring this to a point that I think people might understand more is like, you get your vitamin D levels checked and you say, wait, hold on, I'm taking vitamin D, right? I'm taking all this vitamin D, but my vitamin D levels aren't improving. And you say, well, there's a reason why, because vitamin D is produced by sunlight on the skin and in the eye through a bunch of different pathways with these. Now they're discovering these melanin, which is what we see in the skin when we tan, right? Yep. But it's in everything. It's in every organ. It's in all this stuff. And it's a communicator. It's like a semiconductor of electricity. And so it's turning this light into other things inside the body in order to make things like vitamin D. So if you don't have it, you don't have the right light timing, you don't make the vitamin D. So you can take it all you want, but you're not making it.
Yeah, I actually I had somebody tell me that ingesting vitamin D is completely useless. Like it actually doesn't do anything in terms of,
I think in the research, there's probably, I mean, a couple places probably where it is, you might use it for like a tool for a brief period of time to get someone maybe a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember right, I think the research was on like people who were having like either schizophrenia or something like that, where it was like, okay, you need it now to try to get the brain to start working better. And I'd have to look that up. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was something like that. I think most supplements probably are, I've looked at a lot of them, tested a lot of them, looked at like dissolution rates, how they absorb. I use a lab called a micronutrient lab to see like, did the nutrient go through your body and get it through the white blood cell over time? Is it a chronic, deficiency in this? And that's, there's always people are coming up with better lab tests for these things, but that's the one I use currently, like that I found was pretty good. And you'll see these chronic deficiencies. And so I'm always like, well, why are we so chronic? If we take all these vitamins, they should work, right? And you should see these changes. But once again, it's an isolated vitamin. It doesn't have all the cofactors to it. It's not connected to the right light, the right water, and the right magnetism. And that's how those come back to me.
But go back to the magnetism, like, so kind of drill into that. Like, what are we talking about exactly there when you say magnetism?
Yeah, I mean, so we're getting into like stuff that like it's on the edge of my understanding in a lot of ways, because electricity moves because of magnetism too, right? I think it's like 90 degrees to each other in a field, and they pull electricity into the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have this positive and negative aspect to the human body. We have it on our planet, right? So it's like the toroidal field that goes around the planet. And you have one of those too, right? We're negative at our feet and positive at our head. We have to be able to move energy through the body.
Yeah.
And truly move electrons and energy to spin the proton pumps in the mitochondria, and to stimulate these different areas of the mitochondria to make electrons and keep us alive. So I think that's where magnetism comes in the most, is like we wouldn't even have to mess with it if we went back thousands of years ago. Like we stood on the earth, we were in the sunlight, we were in the right water. It wasn't full of like all these other chemicals like fluoride and stuff, which is a massive semiconductor disruptor in the body. We have all these now, unfortunately, phones and Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, and that stuff it's real. I mean, I think people keep wanting it to not be real, but
So I wanted to get to this because I was curious your cut on it, because it's something that people can call you sort of like a tinfoil hat person and on this, but my feeling is we, to your point, whatever, wind the clock back, it's not even that far, right? A couple hundred years. And there's basically no extra electromagnetic anything in the atmosphere, right? It's just the magnetism of the earth. That's basically it. Right? And to your point, we spent more time outside. We were more connected to the ground. Now we don't do any of that. We're inside more, but we also keep filling up the air, so to speak, with electromagnetic signals. And we just keep putting more out there and filling up the spectrum. And you can say that that's harmless, but I just have to believe it does something. Like there's something.
I mean,
it can't just be nothing. And I think it's also a situation where, my personal opinion, this is not based on science or any data, so to speak, but I think if we could see it, we'd be terrified.
For sure.
If it were smoke, we would be like, holy shit, this is terrifying. But because we can't see it, it's like, oh, it's fine.
Totally.
But I know in my house, like we turn the Wi-Fi off at night when we're sleeping.
Cool.
And I think, okay, maybe that does nothing, but it can't hurt. And that's kind of my take on. Do you have anything like concrete data to support any of that? Or is it still just kind of whatever you think and conjecture?
I personally haven't gone and done like testing on stuff, like as far as like, so I'll use a trimeter, a little handheld meter, and you can see the EMF kind of radiation. And I'm like, just plug your laptop in and turn it on and start using it, and just put your trimeter up, and you'll see it, come way up. And it's like, well, that probably is not great. Yeah. Right. And then if you look at like if you do start to get into the frequencies of how the body operates, and you start to see this 5G wireless towers that we're putting up, this stuff, they're millisievert waves, right? So they're much faster, and they start to mimic too close, in my mind, to how the mitochondria spin the exact same frequency. And to me, it's like, whoa, that can't be good, right? Why? There's an external source out there that's got to be, it's still too close to it's just like common sense. Like, people that are by towers are getting higher levels of cancer, right? There was a study that the FTC did, and I don't know where it is now, but I read it. They had tested to see like if 2G and 3G towers would create any of these issues in the animals, and they put the animals right next to it. And I think it's published, so you can find it just search on Google for it. But the animals actually had very similar metabolic issues that humans did. They started to show very similar inflammatory conditions, and they started to show aging patterns that were, if I remember right, were very similar to the human very quickly.
Yeah.
And they stopped the study. Because it was a study, I think, if I remember right, to prove that wasn't a problem. That it was okay to have this, and they actually stopped the study.
This is not getting the output we like.
And it's worth everybody, like, if anybody's interested, look it up, because it is out there. You can find it, and it's pretty like, well, why is this not published? And you go, well, people want Netflix, right? They want their fast cellular coverage, and they don't,
Yeah. Well,
like we talked about.
So yeah, I guess that, again, I think you could call, certainly people could point fingers at me on this and be like, that's ridiculous. There's no harm there. I don't know. To me, it's like, well, there might be, and I'd rather err on the side of caution. So, what do we do about this? Obviously, it's not going anywhere. And so, like, when you work with people on this, what do you do? Is there something like a protocol you recommend? Is it simple stuff like that? Like just get outside more, get your feet on the ground, turn your Wi-Fi off at night. Don't keep your cell phone in your pocket all day long. Is it that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that. And it's taken me a while, because I was skeptical about all this stuff. I'm very like, not sure, kind of the same camp you are, like, okay. And then I'm also like, do I really want to go down this pathway? Because it's a hard pathway.
And it can terrify you.
And it terrify you. And then you're trying to explain science that, is pretty hard to understand, because you can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't sense it. It's like, my personal belief currently right now is, if you are really sick, the environment you're currently in isn't going to make you better. It just isn't. So if you are, and this gets into a lot of interesting science on mitochondria. So let's say you're your maternal halotype. So you get your mitochondria from your mother. If you're maternal halotype, right? So you can test that on 23andMe. You can see the pathway of your maternal halotype, and that's where your mitochondria came from.
Wait a minute. So back up on that. So your mitochondria comes from one of your parents only?
Yeah, only your mother. Yeah.
It only comes from your mother?
Yeah.
But can it come from your father, or no?
No, not that I know of. No, it's only mother.
Oh, interesting.
And that's how you inherit the power. That's the powerhouse of the body, right? Is inherited through the mother. So the pathway of the mother's mitochondria is a really important piece of like the puzzle of health, because if you are an equatorial person, your family's stayed in an equatorial region, you're what's called a coupled mitochondria. That means like your mitochondria won't release heat quite as much.
Okay.
So it's more energy efficient, keeping heat internal, but not external to heat you up, because you don't need to. You're in this environment, right? So that mitochondria comes into play. It gets pretty complicated with melanin in your skin, stuff called POMC that's in your eye and in your brain, and feeds like your whole pituitary system. It breaks into these different semiconductors in your body that create all this electricity, and with the magnetism and with the water. And actually, from what I understand in this research, is we're actually creating our own water. The mitochondria creates our own water. That's the most important piece of it. Is the electrons in the water are the most important piece that we're creating internally to keep us alive. That's what powers us. So if we take someone from an equatorial region and we stick them in a northern region in Norway, and there's no sunlight that fits their and there's no magnetism that fits their thing, they start to get pretty unhealthy very quickly. We can see that in studies. Like you can read all the studies on different locations where people are, and you can see these instances. And a lot of times, like then you put them in a blue light environment, you start to see these metabolic diseases kick off very quickly because it's all mistimed, right? So if you have a northern ancestry, my mom, and it explains a lot of my weirdness, but like she came in and we were looking through my 23andMe, and I was like, well, that's a weird halotype. And literally my halotype comes in from the Vikings.
What is a halotype? I don't know that term.
It's like good question. It's like a designation of your mitochondria, like your genetic mitochondria, and they're tracking where this goes in the movement of it, right? So like a halotype will come up and I have to look back on my 23andMe because I can't remember the names of them, but it's like an H1 halotype was everybody or something like that, out of the Fertile Crescent area of Africa.
It's probably worth backing up too, just real quick, and explaining what mitochondria is. We've been kind of glossing over that term, but I'm sure there's plenty of people that know the term and don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, so there's a great author, Nick Lane, who did a whole thing on mitochondria. Like he's probably one of the biggest experts on it. And it's like, at some point in time when we had this oxygen explosion on the earth, this bacteria merged with a eukaryote cell and then ultimately ended up powering that cell. They kind of work together. And that is where our mitochondria, we're bacteria, right? So we have this that's what that is mitochondria. And it's our ability to convert sunlight into energy.
Okay.
And use electrons to keep us going. And the way we know it, and I know it primarily, is from sports, right? So you have ATP, your mitochondria create ATP and it breaks down into ADP, and there's this extra phosphorus, and you're taking creatine to, do all these things to create more ATP. And so that's kind of where we hear mitochondria, but I think mitochondria is much more, I think it is probably one of the bigger pieces that we don't understand a lot of. And there's people coming out with like mitochondrial theory of aging and how that's really the secret to some of the longevity stuff, is that you need to keep your electrons, you need to keep negative, right? You need to keep electrons coming up through the body and keeping these processes going.
Yeah.
And we do that through light, water, and magnetism primarily.
Okay.
And then the other ones are kind of like, these other components in this are kind of just, as I get into them, like, oh yeah, they're important, but they're not as important as these first three.
Okay. So when I read those off, is it those three? Is it light, water, magnetism?
Yeah. And it's taken me a lot to like come around to this one, because I was like, God, I don't know,
Well, so
but
yeah. Go ahead. No, keep going.
No. You go ahead.
No, so I think because I want to get to some stuff that's like actionable for people here with all this stuff. So maybe what might be helpful is a little bit of like a rapid fire through this of like, okay, of these 9 things, light, water, magnetism, brain, sleep, nutrition, stress, structure, movement, like what are the top things in your mind that people should be doing with them?
Oh, okay. So like we'll start with light in the morning, up in the morning, no sunglasses, no sunscreen, as much skin as you exposed as you feel comfortable with, or you can based on your environment. With the sunrise, that's primarily, the sunrise is not going to have UV light, and it's going to have red and infrared light. And that's really important for starting this hormonal process and electrical process inside the body. There's a lot of studies on if you have red and infrared light before UV light, you're actually very protected from UV light from actually getting sunburn. But it takes a little bit of time to build that up. So that would be one of my ones right away.
That's like Laird Hamilton referred to it as solar gazing. That's what he was calling it.
Solar gazing, yeah. Some people, I think Dr. Cruz calls it building your solar callus.
Yeah, and right? Andrew Huberman talks about this all the time. But how much time are we talking? 10 minutes, 20 minutes?
I mean, the research is kind of hard to pin down that stuff. I mean, I think it's 10 to 15 minutes. Sunrise. One of the newer ones I'd read was then at the first 10 minutes of UV exposure. So when UV first comes up, which is like here in Park City would be like 10 a.m. You want like 10 minutes of that too, because that's the next light component, right?
Okay. Got
and
it.
then you would do midday sun. And I use like an app called DMinder to put my Fitzpatrick skin type in, like do I burn easy? Am I this color and this? This weight, and it gives you kind of an idea of like how long you can be in the sun where you're getting vitamin D production. Yeah.
That's
it's pretty
app.
accurate.
What's it called?
D is like in David.
Yeah.
Minder, MINDER.
Okay.
DMinder.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
It's really cool. It's a cool app, and it tracks your vitamin D. And so I'll turn it on and I'll say, oh, it's a, partly cloudy day, and I'm, in my shorts, no shirt. And so I'm, covered up 70%, I'm 70% uncovered. And it'll say, like, right now I have like 25 minutes max in the sun.
Okay.
And they say you can do 25 minutes if you want to flip, like you're baking, or just 25 minutes max. And so I'll sit out in my backyard all the time and just do my work, do my things that I have to do. I'll stretch or roll out. I'll leverage multiple things there while I'm in the sun and get that midday sun. And then if you can at night, you try to get a sunlight where you're tapering off, you're capping it, right, with the sun set. That's ideal, right? So that'd be an ideal sun process. How many people can do that? I don't know. So what we do in our house here in the winter, it looks like a haunted house. I have all these red lights that are certain nanometers of red light, and we turn them on all through the house in the morning because one of my daughters has to be up before the sunlight. So we turn it on, and it's red light in the house. So we're trying to mimic getting red and infrared light early in the morning. And then as soon as the sun comes up and she's going to school, we go outside and we stand in the snow and, do things out there. She thinks I'm crazy, but also likes it too. And she tells all her friends about it. They're like, Dad, it's so weird. But so we do that. And then in the evening, we all try to go. I have like a sauna upstairs, like an infrared sauna.
Yep.
And so, those are your hacks you can do. And then there's cold also with that, right? So cold this gets, not to get off the thing here, but if you're uncoupled mitochondria, that means you're from a northern maternal halotype, right? Northern European, you'd want to get cold in the winter. That's going to also create that autophagy for them to keep the mitochondria running better.
What about like places like here, specifically low sunlight in the winter? There's days where it's cloudy, it's snowing, even trying to get outside and you're probably not getting enough vitamin D. So you talked about red lights. There's things like Juves or whatever where you can get kind of, or IR. I've got a one-person IR sauna at home, which I love. Yeah. But what about something like, I've actually got this thing, I haven't used it yet, but it's a vitamin D light. And it comes from Italy. You got any? Is it this Sperity? Is that it? It's like
red, or is it white?
No, it's white. Or no, it's like the lights look like a tanning bed light, basically.
Yeah,
It's I think it's called a Mars. It's like a something Mars. I can't remember the name of the company, but
yeah, there's a couple of them. Like I have a panel of them in my office upstairs, and so I'll time that light because you have to look at what's the percentage of UVA and UVB off that light bulb.
Yeah.
And then that'll mimic a time of day really well. And so mine mimics midday sun. And so I'll time it at midday, stand in front of it and get, you're not tanning, you're just getting like 10 minutes or so of light. And it's like a hack through the winter, I think ultimately better thing would be to go somewhere warm where there's equatorial sun and we'd all like to do that. It's hard to do.
Yeah. I think the tough thing here, like we're still on light and it's already,
I know,
like this is a lot for people to do.
It is. Right. And that's why, so the way I work with this is I'll pick what is ultimately being developed currently right now, which isn't out, is the site and the app I'm working on with developers is it'll help bring this down into like a category to start with. And so it'll score you across these 9 categories and say, hey, let's start with nutrition.
Yes.
And then you can also say, I don't want to do nutrition. I want to start with exercise. So you can put your input into it too. And then it'll go into that section.
Yeah. But something like that, I think would be super helpful for people because I think myself included, it's like, I don't even know of these things where I'm deficient, where I need the most help, and having something that, or a person or an app or whatever that would help triage that to say, here's the thing that you're not doing well on, and spend some time on that, because we can hack ourselves to death these days.
Totally. And you can just end up spending your life doing this stuff. And I think that's not good either too. Like, I think I'm always trying to figure out like which one thing can I pull that's going to do three things, because I don't have time. I have three kids and we're going all over and I'm working in all these different places. And it's like, well, let's make sure we do something that really moves it. Yeah, that's why I kind of go back to light, because it seems to be the biggest driver of the internal chemistry is what happens with the light in your eye and on your skin. Mm-hmm. And we can see this because in our blue light environment now that we're currently in, where we're in these artificial lights, we have heavy, you know, all of them are heavy in the blue and the green spectrum. We're up at night when you wouldn't have that light. That's a direct correlation into cortisol issues and insulin issues. And what do we see on an explosion is metabolic disease. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I am, in my opinion, I think it's very much tied to our screen time and our inability to get rid of that light at night and not have enough red light to balance out this process of how the body works and with the insulin and all this stuff like that. So, yeah, you can see it. I mean, people are getting pretty unhealthy. They're not going the right way. So, you know, things have to, like I said, you have to change your environment. You really have to start thinking like bigger than, oh, it's my food that I'm eating. Yeah, that can contribute. But if we don't have some of these other foundation pieces first, the food might not make that much difference. Mm-hmm. And you can even see that on vacation. You go on vacation, you're in a great sunny place, you're eating and drinking everything, and you're like, that's weird. I didn't gain a single pound.
Yeah,
you know, it's like
that's a good point.
I felt awesome, right? And it's like
some of that's mood too, right? The
mood.
fact that
and the mood is driven by light. That's the other thing. Like, so blue light degrades and breaks down. And that's pretty easy science out there. It breaks down dopamine and serotonin.
Yeah. Okay, so what about water? Because this is one where, man, I've heard tons of, I mean, you would think something as basic as water should be really, really easy. But nowadays, there's anything from reverse osmosis water. There's people that espouse drinking distilled water. There's spring water. There's pH things where it's like we're going to drive the artificially push this into an alkaline type of water, that kind of thing. Yeah. So what's your cut on all of that?
Water is as complicated as all these other ones too. The basic component I would say is I still haven't made a decision on this 100%. If you could get hold of natural spring water, it's literally out of the ground in the spring, that could be the best water there. I would say second is probably a distillation of water. So you distill it. Yep. But then you got to add minerals back to it. And then now people are even saying you have to revitalize it, which means you have to spin it through different vortexing type things to add more electrons to it to structure the water, right? Yep. Or you have to put it out in the sunlight, UV, and move it around. And it's because it's mimicking what it would do in the spring, right? It's running, it's energetic. And then that creates what's called low deuterium water if you're drinking that kind of stuff. Like deuterium in the water, if it's high, creates a bunch of other things. It's been linked to cancer and a bunch of issues. You can test your water. So, you know, if you get in a plastic bottle, you're getting a bunch of all the plastic particles and all the nanoparticles and everything we read about in the news now. So I try to say, like, if you don't have access to a natural spring, your two options are like distillation, which is a pain to do. Like
I've got one too.
Yeah. Yep. You do? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I've gone deep down this rabbit hole, man. I mean, I haven't really gotten into it on this podcast, but just from a long battle with chronic illness, I've gone deep down the detox realm and supplements. And like, I've done fucking everything that you can possibly think of. And I've done that thing where I bought a water distiller, was drinking that. I was sort of halving it with that and spring water, the best I could get, which is a Mountain Valley, the ones in glass.
Yep, in the green,
So it kind of like half and half it, and then I would do some trace minerals with that. I have yet to feel any different doing any of that, I'll be honest. Not to say it's not helping, potentially. But we also have, I mean, our house, when we built our house, we put a whole house filtration system in it. It's called Aquasana, and it's like, it's got a UV light, and it's got, it's already like cleaning the water is a pretty fair amount. Plus you get the other filtration on on the refrigerator, you got that filter too before you drink it. So my feeling has always been, when it comes to tap water coming into our house, we've cleaned it about as good as you can. Yeah. Does the distilling stuff maybe get everything else out of it potentially? I don't know, but and then I've even things where you're talking about like these little pads where it theoretically like structures the water too. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. And I mean, there's some science on it. I was like, God, there's no way this thing does this. And, you know, then you read the papers and you're like, okay. And you can do experiments with your animals. You can like take the structuring stuff and you actually put 2 bowls down and they'll literally all we have like our kids got kittens and they all go to the one bowl. And I'm like, that is crazy.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
How could they, is that, and, you know, and you're like, is that real science? It's kind of like, I'm not sure,
but there's something there.
There's something potentially there. I mean, I think water is misunderstood. James Nestor and I were meeting with people that were doing distilling the water. And so he could, at some point in time, maybe he'll talk about this somewhere, but he's had some where he looked at some lab work with his coronary calcium score, right? And it was high, did distillation. It was nothing. That's pretty unheard of because most doctors will say once you have the calcium buildup inside arteries, like it didn't go away. Yeah. So it's way too early to even jump to a conclusion on it. And there's could be some other things that are connected in here that are not exactly we can't parse out exactly which mechanism was doing it, but there's something there. You know, I think people can reverse osmosis like you're talking about and then remineralize and then revitalize. It's probably about the best you can get. Yeah. Unless you're just drinking straight out of the spring. I mean, it can get overwhelming. It can get to the point where you're just like, you don't even want to drink the water. You're like, I'm just skipping the water. I don't even care. You know, it's like,
just stick to coffee and booze and you're good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like, I think that's where, and the water's truly, it's not even, it is important about what you're drinking, but it's actually how it's being made inside you. And that is the piece that is really difficult to understand. And I struggle with it too, because that's what the mitochondria are doing. They're actually making water with electrons.
So when you brought this up before, I wanted to ask you this question. Have you ever heard of the people that go do extended dry fasting? So no. There's a book by a woman named Michelle Slater. It's called Starving to Heal in Siberia. And she was somebody, she had chronic Lyme disease, and did everything to try to heal herself, super sick. And she was to the point where she was looking up assisted suicide in other countries like Switzerland, I think, where they do that kind of thing. I could be wrong on the country, but something that was done outside of the United States, and came across this. And there's this practitioners in Siberia. There's other places. This was before everything that's going on there with Russia and Ukraine now, but and her husband was Russian or something, or spoke Russian. So she was able to set this up, literally like drug her to Siberia because she could barely walk or anything. And there was this protocol where they work it up, but it was like 2 days and then 5 days and then whatever, where they dry fast, where you sleep outside. So you get water from the air basically. And I think she had to walk 10K a day or something like that, but no food and no water for like 10 days. Wow. And it completely cured her. And it basically is, the theory is, to your point, your body actually starts to sort of like, I mean, I'm not recommending anybody go try this. So let's be clear. Don't go do this. But it's an interesting story. And there's other accounts of this, but this one Russian doctor really espouses this. But basically, it gets to a point where your body, and it has to do with the mitochondria, essentially just incinerates the old cells that are in your body. And with it, it kills any virus or bacteria or anything that's along with that. So it just basically eradicated every like diseased cell in her whole body and replaced them. And it fixed her.
That can make sense because that's massive autophagy, right? Like that's mitochondrial autophagy that's occurring there in a very extreme state. And that definitely could be realistic. I mean,
it's an interesting story. If you haven't read that book, check it out. It's cool.
I wrote it down. I'm going to read it. That's very cool because that's an interesting way of approaching, because, you know, fasting and all those things definitely have mechanisms to.
Yeah. Yeah, and clearly a lot of people fast, but they
Yeah.
drink water or they have
Yeah.
some kind of
Yeah.
intermittent fasting or whatever. And this was when I came across it, I heard it on another podcast and I was like, wow, this story is incredible. And
Yeah. I'm gonna
it's pretty wild.
investigate that. That's interesting.
It's pretty wild. I don't know if I could ever do it. I mean, just even the thought of that is like, holy
No.
crap, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. So we kind of hit on magnetism there. So
Yeah, we got light water, magnetism.
So just these other things, brain, sleep, nutrition, kind of lightning round here. I probably got about 10 or 15 minutes. I got to wrap this up, but what else out of there? Because like, look, I think there's a lot of arguments people could make around exactly what to eat, but whole foods in general, like, I mean, like, you know, you can get kind of down to the basics where people are like, got it. I think people are way more tuned into the necessity of sleep these days and have gotten a better handle on that. Like cool room, completely dark, you know, no artificial light, all of that kind of stuff. But anything you want to add on those, and then these other ones, brain, stress, structure, movement.
On nutrition, I do think that there is some really solid research, in my opinion, on that. If we need to make more water, if we need to be healthier, we need to get our mitochondria run better, that there is a lot of stuff that does push towards a keto diet, especially in a winter time following your. So I would say like, yeah, it's called ancestral eating, but it's a little deeper thought process than that. Like you just look up your halotype and you understand like, oh, I'm from, you know, Norway. And it's like, well, what was the food there? And in the winter that, I'm not going to be eating the apple from Chile, right? Like, so energetically, those are not working together. And that makes sense to me from a quantum physics type perspective on frequencies, things like that. So I do think there's a pretty good research on that. Like I used to go to the metabolic health conferences, all keto, everything was keto. And, you know, it's like, okay, well, summer months, I think you can deviate off of that because light's different. And eat the foods that are growing in the environment. And I think that's really simple stuff is like whatever is growing in the environment that you came from primarily, right? Your ancestral history is maybe start with that as your foundation. And then you can morph it into the environment you're in right now with the light. I still would need a something from Chile currently right now, right? I'm in Park City. So like what's here in Park City? What's around this area? To me, that makes some sense with the quantum physics aspects. And I think, like you said before, whole foods, you know, don't eat things that have colors you've never seen in nature. Don't eat things that have multiple, like I tell my clients, I'm like, don't eat anything that has like 75 ingredients in it. It's probably crap. You know, it's like usually healthy food is one ingredient, maybe two, right?
Yep.
Like chicken's chicken, beef's beef, you know, it's like, there's nothing else there, right? Like eat that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, because otherwise it gets, you know, what about this? And what about macronutrients? And do I need more protein in this? Oh my God, you get down a rabbit hole on performance and stuff like that. And I think you just have to test that for yourself. It gets too,
I
everybody's
agree.
got a theory, right? Like everybody's got this and that, and this is the way to go. And I'm like, I've looked at all of them too, like you. I think you have to just figure out what works for you.
Yeah,
and
I agree completely.
You know, and sleep, I agree with you on all the stuff with sleep. The only thing I'd say on sleep is like make sure you get that early morning sun because that starts the whole melatonin cycle, right? The light in the day is really important to get because that's capping the end part of it.
Yeah. And
I do think like eating too late, that messes up your cortisol and causes you to wake up a little bit too. So basic stuff like that on sleep. Stress, we all know stress. That gets into a whole nother like component of like I do this whole breathing stuff and it's super deep into the breathing because I realized if you assess the brain on the breathing, sometimes the brain stem is just not working right. So you might be giving someone, let's say a Wim Hof method of breathing, that might not be the right one because that part of the brainstem is fine. So now you're upregulating the piece of the brainstem that doesn't need that. So you might need slow breathing. You might need, you know, quick pulse breathing, right? Like where you don't, you're moving it. It's like called like Stroya Linka breathing or something. I can't remember the name of it. It's like a Russian breathing style. You know, some people need a bunch of oxygen coming in to get them going. I mean, you have to assess, right? That's the thing is like, there's no one breathing technique, right? That
totally
works.
Yeah. No, I've
You
experimented
need
with
to know what's
yeah.
going on with the brainstem from the person.
Yep. No, I've experimented with a lot of different breathing
Yeah.
techniques, and yeah. It
And
totally
I'm
depends on what
like
you want.
It's hard because you have to, you're like, oh, I don't know if this was the right one. And it's like, so.
Let me ask you on structure. What's
Mhm.
your cut on chiropractic work? Because I know people that are all about it and swear by it, and I know other people that are like, it's total bullshit.
Depends on the chiropractor.
Okay.
There are some that are amazing with tissue work and alignment. I'm not a huge fan of like popping and adjusting somebody and then say, all right, cool. Because guess what you're going to do? You'll walk out of the door and you're going to sit in your car. And so all of the, like, I always tell my clients, if you go to your chiropractor and you get adjusted, go outside and do a bunch of functional movement because you're integrating that new alignment with the brain, with the cerebellum.
Yeah.
So I was like, don't just go it's like a massage. Like, don't just go get back in your car.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You get a massage, get up and do something with it to integrate it so it becomes useful.
Yep.
But I think there's some people that are really good. I think some people, obviously, it's like anybody. You go and they might not have a deeper understanding, or they might not be able to pick up what's going on with the client, and they do something, and it tends, can hurt them.
Yeah.
But people feel like when something pops, they're like, oh, I feel so much better, and you're like,
yeah. Look,
maybe, what was the root cause of it? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I've gone deep into this, right? Like, I've done I worked at the doctor. We did sacral base X-rays. So in your sacrum, we would look at this demarcation line and standing and sitting. And so if you're standing barefoot, and we'd look at how in relation is that sacral base demarcation line to the first vertebrae.
Mm-hmm.
And you can determine there how level you really are.
Mm.
And so I've done a lot with like leg discrepancies, and I've had tons and tons of people be like, oh, I have a right leg discrepancy, and they go and get tissue work on their psoas muscle, and it releases, and they're like, look, I'm equal. And I'm like, well, let's see what happens in a little while with ground reaction and gravity, and let's see what happens tonight. And then they're completely back to, not level. So I think there is some components, like I wear a little tiny, like if I'm on a flat, hard surface, like I'm playing tennis or something, I'll wear a little bit of a lift on my right side because I'm about 3 or 4 millimeters off of level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to save discs. I'm trying to like keep my body going. So I'm like, that's an easy fix for me and I've tested it with the lift in and then redid the x-rays, and it's like perfectly level. And so you got to think like now you have more rotational power, you have more alignment, your head becomes into, your vestibular system gets into alignment more. Your eyes, actually the muscles in your eyes will change, like they're tracking and level and all kinds of stuff. So
yeah,
we have x-rays I've done with tons of people, like before and after. Here's, how many millimeters you're off. And you do it sitting too, where you're off. When you sit down, you can slide a little thing underneath your sit bone, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I have no back pain. It's like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's like structure. I mean, structure is all this stuff. It's how your brain is, how your eyes are perceiving the environment. What's your vision? What's your peripheral vision? What's your sound acuity? Like, how big is it? Do you pick up sounds back in here? Do you not? What's happening with these vertebrae because they're jamming up all this stuff? Is the lymphatic system flowing? I mean, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah. Real quick here in the last couple minutes, can we talk a little bit about combat science and what that is? I'm assuming this is something you still do, right?
Yeah. I've tapered off a little bit on combat science. So combat science was started. 2000, I forgot. It was literally like doing jiu-jitsu in the park with some buddies, and this guy was teaching it, and he's like, literally a savant. And so I found out, like, well, who's your teacher? And he's, this guy, Peter Friedman, who's in New Hampshire, in the backwoods of New Hampshire. And so I'm like, well, this art is interesting because of biomechanical, like fighting. You're not fighting per se like boxing or kickboxing or Krav Maga, where you're trading blows. You're actually fighting structure of somebody, right?
Yep.
So you're looking for like, you're cognitively trying to race ahead of the person, right? If you put them in you put them in a lock, they're like, oh, I'm in a lock, but they didn't realize you'd already trapped their foot and locked that bone in their foot. So then when you start to move them, things are starting to let go,
Mm-hmm.
not a good way.
Yeah.
right? You're fighting the structure of the spine. And I thought that was really fascinating as a martial art, because I had boxed and, you know, also gotten hit in the head by some really good boxers. And you're like, well, that sucks. Like, you know, I was like in a gym in Austin where you're fighting like some of the top contenders. I'm like, oh, that sucks. Like getting hit by these guys, you know, they're pretty good. And I was like, yeah, there's a use of that in the street. But then I was like, and then I started looking at like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was like, well, that's pretty cool, because that's a cool ground art. It has all these components, and I think it's got super interesting movement. And I'm like, but how does that work with a knife? How does that work with a gun? How does it work with multiple opponents? How does that work with, you know, a setup of somebody? You're in a room and you don't know who's going to jump in, right? So you end up going to the ground and you get hurt. And I'm not like a great martial artist. I like the biomechanics of it and the study of it. And so I started building the fitness side of that business.
Okay.
And the movement side and all the, like, how I was like, well, how would you train that? How would you be better? How could you be quicker? And it, you know, it's funny now I see all this stuff. This is a long time ago. It looks a lot like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training that you see out there with like body flow movements and animal flow and all these things. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, it's awesome. Like I was doing that like a long, long time ago, never on video or anything like that, just with people that were working with us in the park. And I always say, like, you know, the martial art is your perception, right? It's like how you perceive that environment. How are you picking up those threats? You know, I've been able to work with some of your community.
I was going to ask, have you worked with the military at all?
Mm-hmm.
Have you worked?
Yeah,
with
not in using the martial art.
Yep.
Well, we discussed it. You know what I mean? And there's layers where they were thinking about adding it in, and I know it's been brought in with Peter Friedman. He brought in his stuff and talked to people about it, and I don't know the extent of where it went. It's one of those things, like, I honestly have just run out of time to train it. It's like it's a weird, like when you see it on video and you watch it, you're just like, what the hell is this stuff? This looks stupid. Because how do you train like an arm break, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to have a willing, like, uke, I think is what they call it in Japanese, where it's like a partner that's like, I'm gonna punch, and it looks like they're just sticking their stupid arm out and holding it, and you're putting them in a lock, but you're feeling all the sensitivity of the joint. You're like, a lot of time we'll do it all blindfolded or eyes closed, because you're trying to figure out sensitivity to what grabbed you, what thumb, what hand, where was the position, what's the energy, you know, are they pulling, twisting? Because it's like, to me, it started to get more applicable in like real life stuff. Because, you know, let's say you're clearing a room and you can't see anything and you get grabbed, like something happens. Like, what could that be useful in that environment, right? Could that be? So I started to like try to think about how to bring it in, and it's just I'm not good enough of a practitioner. I don't have time to do it to go teach it, right? Like I would bring in the people that teach the actual martial art really well to come do it. But it's interesting because the guys I've worked with, there's a very, you know, there's a path that they like to take. You know, it's like you see the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really going off in a lot of the training and stuff, and you know, there's Krav Maga and stuff, and it's like, I'm like, oh, these are really cool arts. I'm not even sure like which one is the best. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know either.
People say, oh, UFC and you fight and that's proven, and I'm like, yeah, but you're still in a ring on a padded floor with no walls or rocks or dust or dirt or knives or, you know, things to slam somebody into. You know, it's like, it's awesome. I love all of it. I wish, you know, I knew, you know, it's another biomechanics thing and like thing I wish I could like sit and figure out too. You know, it's like, but it's a cool, like, people are interested. I think it's always worth being open and exploring all of these things, because you never know, right? Like what might happen in a flow of an altercation or a fight. I mean, I've had things happen and it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like I had someone grab me and this guy was just out of nowhere. And I just, you know, I knew it was like on my side and just rolled him right over and like, dude, you sure you want, like, you okay? And it was like, and it was weird. And I went back and I was like, there's just a reaction because I felt the energy, you know, but I don't know if I had trained, I might not have had that same reaction, you know? Yeah. So I don't know. And it can blend nicely with weapons. That's the other thing too. It's all meant to have weapons involved with it, you know, so a lot of firearm stuff, you know, knives, the sticks, cords, Anything's good. Use anything and everything, right?
I really appreciate the conversation on this. I think it can be a very challenging space to navigate in terms of what we're supposed to be doing for our health these days. There's we're talking about so many hacks out there and so much information. And, but getting back to a point you made, I think we are lacking, I think, to a large extent in Western medicine on the prevention side of things. And I've just found from my own personal journey that you got to take a lot of that into your own hands and sort of figure out what you're missing and what you need to do. But it really should be too. I mean, prevention is on us as individuals to try to stave off disease and decrepitude and all of that. So, if people want to work with you, I think your website is brand new, right? ArondMethod.com.
I dropped out an old one. Yeah, it's pretty funny. I had an old website and I was looking, I was like, oh my God, because I'm horrible at social media and all that. I don't have time half the time to do any of that stuff. And you know, at some point in time, I'll have to hire someone to do more of that for me just because, you know, it's important in this day and age. So we just launched, IRONMethod.com will be up because it's transferring over from the server, and then IRONMethod.net is up too as a backup.
Okay.
People can just reach out. There's a contact form on there. And
what do you do? If they want to work with you, is it personal coaching? Do you do group coaching? Is there courses? Are there keynote addresses?
So currently it's I'll take the client. We'll have a consultation. We'll sit and talk. Usually I'll do. If they want to do the whole program, I'll do 3 different lab tests right off the bat. Mm-hmm. So I'll look at an MRT mediator release test for food sensitivities. It looks at a global look of food sensitivities because some of the other ones are not good. They're only one immune pathway. So, and that's typically what you see with a blood prick on your finger. Mm-hmm. There's better, more robust tests that, and these things aren't great 100%, but they're better than what is out there in a lot of ways. I'll do that test. I'll do a micronutrient test to see chronic nutrients that are low, mineral, vitamins and minerals. And then I'll look at, I use a test called the Dutch, and it's dried urine testing of complete hormones. And it's a whole nother subject we could get into down the road, but it's it looks at the pathways of all your hormones. And so I have a lot of guys military guys that are training and stuff, and a lot of them are on testosterone. And I'm like, well, do you know if you actually need it? And they're like, well, my free T was low. And I was like, but do you know if you had enough testosterone? And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, this could all be getting jammed up. Estrogen receptors could be messing this up. Your estrogen not detoxing. Did you have the hormones above, right? Do you have pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA? Is DHEA sulfating to make testosterone, to make it available? And they're like, I don't know. I was like, those are the things you should know, right? Yeah. Because if you need to know if you're taking it, because you might be taking something you don't need because you just needed to get rid of the estrogen better, or one of those pathways that isn't clearing. A sulfation, methylation, and glucuronidation are 3 pathways that need to clear, I think. And you just test them. This test shows you all this stuff, and it's really cool. It shows you cortisol patterns. It shows you, oh my God, it's neurotransmitters and how those are working. So people who have concussions and PTSD or suffer from blast issues, some of the guys I work with, will look at that and see this is a great way of seeing, I put you in the sunlight and we do all this stuff. Guess what? Your dopamine comes up. Here it is right here. Yep. So it's a cool way of at least getting a baseline for a lot of stuff, because otherwise you don't know. You're just guessing. Yep. And some of the blood tests are a snapshot of time instead of a trend over time. Yep. Right? For sure. Yep. So those are the 3. And then I just put in the lifestyle protocols that we talked about with some of the light, water, magnetism, start going down the rabbit hole of switching out water filters and getting blue light out and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I just keep them going. And not because I want to keep a client forever by any means. I just want them to start hitting on all these points so that they can take care of themselves. And what's even better is if they teach it to somebody else. That's even better. Yeah. So, cool. Well, you look the part too, and that's always helpful.
right? Like
Thanks.
it helps if somebody's like a fitness nutrition person and they're 52 and they look like you, and they obviously shop at, they purchase
good stores with the
good
nice
wardrobe
colors,
choices. Yeah. It definitely helps sell the product. So, but appreciate it, John. Really enjoyed the conversation. And I may reach out to you, take some of those tests. I've taken a lot in my time.
You should. I mean, if you anything like that you want to do, like we can you can talk about it, and I can walk you through more of the process, because it is a big process. But all the guys I've worked with, I mean, I have a guy who was retired from the teams, and he's done a lot of stuff. And most important thing I've come across with him is that the level of depression and the stuff that was there prior to starting what we did, and the level of anxiety and the things like, man, just no hope, right? To today, and the difference of that guy, to me, makes it all worth it, right? Like, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen, is to see someone in this state that's done so much, and obviously done so much for the country. And I mean, a lot. And to be from there to here, and now healthy and like vibrant, and just like,
that's awesome.
To me, that's what it's about. Like,
yeah,
at the end of the day, I don't care what lab test it is. I don't care how we do it. Like, as long as it ends up being, hopefully getting to that point, that's why I do it.
Thanks for listening to On the X, an Ironclad original, presented by Mechanicswear and the official podcast of the Navy SEAL Foundation. You can learn more about Jon at arendmethod.com. And for more information about the work of the foundation and to learn how you can get involved, please visit NavySEALFoundation.org. See you next time.